Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. And welcome to the first episode of the Runebound Retrospective. This Runebound Retrospective will be a super casual deep dive series into one of my favorite adventure games, Runebound. In this series, we will be taking a look at how I play Runebound, including the house rules that I use. This will not be an exhaustive look because I don't own everything. While I still own a lot, there are a few expansions that I don't own. We will be taking a look at 4 of the 5 big box expansions. I am missing the Midnight expansion, and that thing is super expensive. We will take a look at the character deck expansions and a few of the small deck expansions. Many of my small expansions have already been mixed in with the cards from the base game, so we won't be taking a look at those individually, but I do have the boxes and we can at least read about those small box expansions. After looking at Runebound 2nd Edition, we will then look at Runebound 3rd Edition. I imagine that this series is going to be about 5 or 7 episodes long. So Runebound was copyright 2004-2005 by Fantasy Flight Games. It was designed by Daryl Hardy and Martin Wallace, developed by Kevin Wilson, and a lot of the cover art, maybe most of the cover art, was done by the great artist from Denmark, Jesper Ejsing. And this era of Fantasy Flight art is one that I think is really, really great. It is old enough to where it has a vintage vibe. It has a vintage quality to that. And I think that's because you can tell that the art was hand drawn. You can see you can see the impact of the human hand on the art. It's not digital art like a lot of art these days is. So it does have that vintage quality. And at least one of the covers for Runebound is in maybe my top 3 favorite board game covers of all time. And I love Jesper Ejsing's art. He did a lot of art for Magic the Gathering, and his art is fantastic. And there are a lot of artists who contributed to the world of Runebound. And some of those artists are... So we have a graphic design by Scott Nicely, cover art here by Jesper Ejsing, board art by Kurt Miller, and we also have card art by Hien Rodriguez, Andy Braze, Kieran Yanner, Lou Frank, John Goodenough, John Moriarty, Ben Provenost, Kevin Sneff, and Jesper Ejsing. So in addition to looking at Runebound in 2023, this is also part of a larger project that I am working on at the Dungeon Dive. And that is the first ultimate showdown of Overland adventure games, in which I, along with Dungeon Dive patrons and members of the Dungeon Dive Facebook group, are ranking a whole bunch of Overland adventure games. The games are being ranked in 5 different categories, and that is how close does it get to being effortless fun, how well does it play solo, the visual vibe, look, feel, and quality of the art, the variety, does the game have enough encounters and stuff to do and see, and how adventurous is it? So we've already finished, at the time that this video will post, we've already finished the first group of 5 games, and those games are Explorer Valley of the Dead King, Talisman 2nd Edition, Runebound 2nd Edition, Pauper's Ladder, and Dungeon Degenerate's Hand of Doom. And then we will go on with the next group of 5, and then once we finish a whole bunch of games, I think there'll be about 30 games in this contest. We will compare those scores, and I will put those in a ranking, and we'll have kind of a final 5 and maybe a loser's bracket as well. So it's been a lot of fun so far. So if you want to participate in that, you can either join the Dungeon Dive patron or you can join the Dungeon Dive Facebook group. And then each group will also have its own video. So expect a video soon in which I will be going over the results of the voting on Explorer Valley of the Dead King, Talisman 2nd Edition, Runebound 2nd Edition, Pauper's Ladder, and Dungeon Degenerate's Hand of Doom. Okay, so let's get into this first episode. And this first episode is going to cover the base game of Runebound. And it's going to be a little bit different because I'm going to focus on house rules. I am going to focus on how I play Runebound, because I play Runebound with a ton of house rules and fan-created content. So Runebound is an open world fantasy adventure game, and it reminds me of a lot how I play open world fantasy video games. Things like Skyrim and Assassin's Creed Odyssey. In the world of Runebound, I can just head off in a random direction and encounter something fun and adventurous to do. With my base game of Runebound, I have a number of different fan-made expansions that I have printed out from Artscow, or I've ordered from Artscow, and I will post links to all of these in the description and in the first post down below. So if you want to play this game the way I do, you can. So let's talk a little bit about how I play Runebound. First of all, let's take a look at the character that I am playing right now. So I am playing Spirit Speaker Mock, who has 4 health and 4 fatigue. Before moving, I may take 2 fatigue to heal a health, to heal a wound. His skills, he's good at diplomacy and sneaking. And he's not very good at range combat. His base stats for range combat is a 0. His base stat for melee combat is a 4. And his base stat for magic combat is a 3. He does 1 damage in melee and 2 base damage in magic combat. I am also armed here with this padded leather armor, and I have the Mace of Kalos. The armor, I can use it to prevent 1 wound, and the mace, I can activate it to inflict an additional 2 points of damage in melee combat. I also right now have a couple cards attached to my character, which will give me a couple extra special powers, and that is the Gift of the Druids and the Master Huntsman. So the Gift of the Druids says the Druids respect those who can travel freely through nature without need for bridges or trails and aid them in their travels. This allows me to manipulate the movement dice a little bit and allows me to have some freer movement. And then I have here the Master Huntsman. Your reputation as a huntsman precedes you when you enter towns, and the locals always clamor to see what you've slain. With this card, when I complete different challenges, I can add those challenges underneath this card. And then when I go into various settlements, I can trade those challenges in for certain amounts of gold. So that is a very, very handy card to have. So my custom games of Runebound add a whole bunch of different fantasy, or a whole bunch of different fan-made expansions. The main expansion that I use is called Runebound Tales Questing. And this is a deck of cards that has a whole bunch of different quests that you can go on. And for me, when I play Runebound, the way I play is I have to beat 3 of these quests. I have to complete 3 quests and then finally kill one of the powerful monsters from the red challenge deck. So the challenges in Runebound are divided into 3 different decks. We have the green challenges, the yellow challenges, the blue or purple challenges. I always forget which. I think they're blue, but they look purple, or are they purple but look blue? I can't remember. And then we also have the red challenges. So there are a whole bunch of challenge cards. These are all of your adventure cards, just like you might see in Talisman. And we go from easy to medium to difficult and to hard. And normally in a game of Runebound, you are going to want to defeat the High Lord Margarth, and this is the main dragon that you have to beat. The first player to kill Margarth wins the game, or you can kill 3 of the other dragons and take their dragon runes, and that's another way that you can win the base game. But these are all kinds of different challenges. A lot of them are combat challenges. Some of them you have some non-combat things. And even on some of the combat challenges, you will have things that you have to do before you enter combat, some kind of skill test. We also have these various events, and these events can come out onto the world and adding wrinkles to the overall goal of the game. And they can also change some of the rules and just add little things to happen during the adventure. So at the beginning of the game, what I do is I take my Runebound questing deck. And again, these are all different kinds of quests. You can have quests searching for things, or maybe going to certain markets, trying to find lost relics and runes, trying to meet certain individuals, trying to recruit allies to join in your fight, helping sick cities, and just basic exploring quests, all kinds of super cool things to do. And so in my games of Runebound, I have to beat 3 of these before I can defeat a single red creature to win the game. Now, I don't play with any kind of timer track or any kind of pressure on me. I play super casually where I can just go out and have lots of adventure because that's where I think Runebound is the most fun. I also play with the Cities of Adventure deck. This Cities of Adventure deck is another fan-made expansion, and what this does is when you visit the various settlements on the board, you will roll some dice and you will have an adventure depending on which city you are in. And they're just little tiny things, little story snippets, little things that can happen to you, such as being robbed, or you might find some money on the ground. Maybe you become lost, or you find a hidden market. Just cool little things that can happen to you while you are on your adventure in those cities. Because normally when you go into the cities, nothing really special happens. Now, this Cities of Adventure deck also comes with some other house rules that you can add to your game, such as foraging out in the wilderness to help heal. It also comes with some house rules that affect the shopping, that affect the various markets. But I have actually created my own house rule for the market decks and for the shopping phase, and so we'll talk about that in just a minute. So another deck of cards that I use is called In the Wilds, and this is an adventure deck that is separate from all of the green, yellow, blue, and red adventure cards in the game. And those cards, the normal decks of cards that you will draw for Runebound, you will draw one of those when you land on a space that has one of these adventure tokens, and you will draw a corresponding color. And then when you defeat that challenge, you will get the number of experience on the back. But there are also a lot of empty spaces on the board. And sometimes when you play Runebound, you will land in these empty spaces and it's just kind of a boring turn. Nothing happens. Well, that's where this In the Wilds deck comes into play. When you land on a space that has no settlement or it doesn't have any adventure tokens or anything to do, you will draw one of these cards and then you will also have an adventure on the blank spaces. So this deck here adds a whole bunch of fun things that can happen. I highly recommend this deck as well. So in this deck, you can find a barred path, a misty valley, and sometimes there will be terrain icons on these cards. And if there are terrain icons, then this card, if you draw it in a plane, or if you have to match up the icon to the terrain that you are in, or else you have to discard it. And these can just be all kinds of different things, neat little things that happen, such as finding some celestial light, a vantage point, out and about, potent petals. On your way, you can go into the foothills. You can find a dark cave or a gloomy path. Maybe you have some weapon fatigue, a hidden hamlet, a lucky find, minor wounds, not far off, old paths. So all kinds of cool little interesting things can happen to you on your journey. So this deck of cards here in the wilds just adds a whole bunch of variety to the feel of the open world adventuring. With the questing deck, you will also need the clues deck. And this is where the questing in using the Runebound Tales questing deck, this is really what makes that a standout expansion, a standout fan-made expansion. Because when you have a quest, you aren't just going to a certain hex and rolling some dice. You have to find where this quest is. So you actually have to go out and explore the world and explore settlements and engage with the world in order to find your quests. So each one of these quests in the upper left-hand corner, I'm drawing some very bad examples here, but in the upper left-hand corner, will have a certain terrain symbol. So to meet Iman Elkif, I have to find a certain forest space. These 3 quests can actually happen in any terrain. They are wild terrain. There are lots of wild terrain. So to find the brass dragonette, I have to find him or her, it in a mountains space. Right now, one of my quests is to recruit Urig the half ogre, and I have to find Urig in a hills space. And so once you know the terrain that you are looking for, then you can go out questing for clues. And there are a number of different ways to get clues in the game. So there are 3 or 4, a handful of ways to get clues in the game. You can go to a settlement and you can take a diplomacy or a spot test. The way you do skill checks in this game is very simple. You will roll 2d10, you will total the results with zeros being 10, and then you will add any relevant modifier. And so when you go into a settlement, you can take a diplomacy or a spot check of 15. And if you pass, you can gain a clue. You can gain also a +2 bonus to that roll for every gold that you spend. So that's kind of represents you going into these settlements, maybe paying the bartender at the tavern for rumors, eavesdropping on people discussing the things that are happening around the land. So if you do that, you can draw a clue. Another way you can gain clues is in the wild. You can forfeit some movement dice. So the movement rules in Runebound are very unique. I don't see these in too many games like this, and I do really enjoy it. You roll a certain number of movement dice, and these movement dice have the icons on them that represent the various kinds of terrain that you will be exploring. We have roads, we have plains, rivers, forests, hills, mountains, and swamps. And then depending on what you roll, you can lay those out on the board in order to chart your path. And you just have to match up terrain. So I really like this aspect of the game. I like laying the dice out, and then that is my path that I am taking. But to gain a clue, you can forfeit a certain number of dice, and then you can roll those dice that you forfeit, and you can take a look at those, and if any of those match your terrain or surrounding terrain, then you can draw a certain number of clues. So that in that way, it kind of represents you out in the wilderness searching for clues. Again, these the way you pick up the clues in this expansion is super, super thematic. You can also, if you go to a certain adventure space, like let's say I was in this space now and I had to challenge this yellow challenge and I would draw a card. Before looking at it, I could declare that I'm going to subdue this challenge. And if this challenge ended up being a horde of ghouls that I would have to overcome. But since I chose to subdue this challenge, if I conquered this challenge, I wouldn't get any rewards. I would basically take them captive and then kind of interrogate them in order to find a clue. So you have to declare that you are subduing the challenge before you know what it is, before you know what the reward possibly could be. Again, that is a very thematic way of gaining these clues. So because I'm looking for Urig in the hills, because I need 4 clues in the upper right-hand corner of the quest cards, you will find an icon that shows how many clues you need. And so then you have to kind of triangulate the space on the board where this particular quest exists. I need to find a hills and I need to have 4 clues. And those clue cards also have terrain icons on them. And so you have to find a hills, and then you have to have clue cards that match the terrain around that hill with the number of clue cards that you need. It's super cool. I love that idea of having to triangulate, having to pinpoint a certain hex on the board, using these clue cards to find the hexes that will point to that clue. And then usually what I do once I have enough clue cards and I've found a certain hex that can represent where that quest is, I will put one of these doom tokens, and that will be, okay, so that is now my quest destination. So a very, very cool expansion. Lots of different neat things to encounter. I love the idea of looking for your clues. It's not just a simple task of going into a settlement and picking a clue card. it feels like you really are out here exploring the world and exploring, finding the clues, investigating things, and paying people off, listening for rumors, going to taverns and hearing people, overhearing people discuss, the various things going on in the world. It really does add a lot of fun. It adds a lot of challenge, and it makes for interesting ways to connect dots between all of the various random elements that are happening in Runebound. Okay, now let's take a look at my custom market house rule. So normally in a game of Runebound, you will take all of your item cards, you will mix those up in a huge stack, and then each of the settlements will have a certain number of items available that you can purchase. And it can make things very difficult for finding weapons, finding armor, finding the things that you actually need. And so what I've done is I've made my own Runebound marketplace. And I have taken these cards and I have separated them into 4 different groups. And first of all, we have all of my allies. So the allies, these are all people that you can hire in a party to help you on your adventure. And I've created an allies deck, and the allies are all hanging out in the tavern. And then I've taken all of my weapons and armor and put those in a deck, and that is my blacksmith deck. Every settlement has a tavern and a blacksmith. And so you can always have a guarantee of being able to either hire an ally or buy a weapon or a piece of armor. I've also taken all of my runes, and runes are very powerful magic items, and these are available at a runesmith. And then I've taken all of the artifacts, and artifacts are magical items and magical trinkets, magical gear, magic weapons, and just pieces of equipment that have been granted enchantments. And I've created an artificer deck, and so these are available at the artificer. So every settlement, like I said, has a tavern and has a blacksmith. So when you go into a settlement, you can draw up to 3 cards from a combination of those 2 decks. Or there's a chance that you can search for a runesmith or search for an artificer. And if you find one in that settlement, then you can also draw up to 3 cards, or you can draw cards from the runesmith and the artificer deck when you are drawing your 3 cards. So if you want to get one of the powerful runes, you need to search for a runesmith, and then there is a chance that you can buy one of the runes. So I like playing this way because, one, it allows me to find the important allies or weapons quickly, or pieces of armor quickly. But if I also want to search for runes or search for certain artifacts, then I can as well. And having that chance to find these more powerful shops adds a little element, kind of like Warhammer Quest when you are going into the various settlements there. There are also some other house rules that I play with, and you can find most of these on a Board Game Geek. So there is a printout of Runebound, the quicker version, and this just has a whole bunch of various things that you can choose to play your game with in order to make the game shorter. That is one of the issues with Runebound, and one of the issues with games like Runebound is sometimes they can really drag on and just kind of go on and on and on, especially if you are playing with other players. So these rules are kind of modules you can plug in order to play a faster game of Runebound. If you enjoy playing solo, but you want more pressure, you want something to light the fire underneath your adventurer's feet to push them to that final confrontation, then you can play with the Runebound threat track. And there are rules for this on BGG, and there is a threat track that you can print out where you will be under some time pressure to complete your final quest. I also play with a modified leveling up system where it takes 2 points of experience. And again, you gain experience by completing certain challenges. But in my leveling up experience, it makes leveling up at the beginning of the game faster, and it gets more difficult to level up as you progress. So with my house rule for leveling up, I play that it costs 2 points of experience plus the number of level up tokens you currently have. So at the beginning of the game, you have 0 level up tokens, so it only costs 2 points to level up. Right now, I have 3 points. I have 3 level up tokens. I have a +4 now to my ranged ability and a +2 to my magic ability. So my next level, it will actually cost 5 points of experience to level up. So there's kind of a ramping in the level up system in the way that I play the game. There's also a blog written by Thomas P. King, and I'll post a link to that blog below. And he has a number of other house rules that sound really interesting, and I haven't yet played with them, but I am looking forward to experimenting with them. One of his house rules is called an adventure log, which it sounds really interesting. So in this variant, rather than going out into the world and having these random encounters where you just draw from a random deck, you just draw a card at random. At the beginning of the game, you have a certain number of cards in your hand, and these represent the things that your character can do. And so you can kind of plan for your adventure. I like this. Sounds pretty cool because you can take a look. Okay, so let's say now they're almost like little mini quests. You know, in this game that you need to defeat the Razorwing mold. You know that you might have to avoid this Thunderball trap. You know that you might need to defeat the Bandit King of Blackthorn, or maybe defeat the Dragon Lord of Mithralin. So that's kind of a cool a variant there. There is also a variant where you can take all of these events. So each of the color of challenge cards has a certain number of world events. And he plays the game where he takes all of these out and makes his own deck of events. And because they escalate from 1, 2 to 3, it kind of adds this dramatic drive. It adds this escalating tension to the game. And he creates a deck of adventure cards and uses that as a timer. And every 3 turns, he draws a new adventure card going up from green through yellow to blue to red. So that's another kind of neat way to play if you wanted to add a little bit of time pressure to your game. He also has a variant where he can spend turns camping out in the wilderness in order to heal. And there are some other variants like that. For me, that doesn't really work because I don't play without, I play without a timer. And so just having to give up a turn really doesn't mean anything. So for me, another variant that I use is when I go to a town, I use a quick healing variant to where it just costs 1 point of gold to completely heal all of your wounds and all of your fatigue. One other variant that I am developing right now is called the Warrior Merchant variant. And I'm in the beginning stages of this, but I think it's going to be really, really cool. And I'm looking forward to playing it. I'm going to play this new variant right after I make this video. And I was thinking about a variant where you are playing you're playing a warrior merchant basically, and you are buying and trading and selling equipment and gear throughout the land. And in this variant, you will start your game all the way in the northernmost settlement of Frostgate. And you will start with one random item. And then you have to sell and buy a piece of gear at each of these settlements, working your way all the way down to the south, all the way down here to Venvale, which is off camera. Sorry about that, but I can't get the whole board on the camera here. But once you work your way down, stopping at each settlement along the way, selling one piece of gear, buying another piece of gear, then you make your way all the way to the south, and you have to take the gear that you get from the southernmost settlement all the way back up to Frostgate, and then that's how you would win the game. And you have to do that without being knocked out, without dying. I think that sounds like a lot of fun. It just adds a different kind of wrinkle, a different kind of twist to the game of Runebound. And that really is the best thing about the base game of Runebound, is the rules are so simple. I cannot play this game for 1 or 2 years, set it up, and I don't have to reread the rules. I don't have to relearn the rules. Everything about Runebound is super simple. The world is very open, and it creates this. It makes it very easy to add your own rules, to make your own kind of game, to play the game in the way that you like it. So Runebound is great. It's one of my favorite adventure games, but it's not quite as good at generating those random, serendipitous series of events as games like Secret of the Lost Tomb and Explore It are. It has all of those elements to do so, but it can often feel a little on the dry side. I still love it, especially with all of the aforementioned house rules and expansions and just little tweaks that you can do to make the game feel more exciting. There is something about the hex that engenders exploration. I think it's the 6 signs of the shape that encourage a freedom of movement. I love the maps in Runebound, and I always spend time just looking at them before I play the game. The game has some fantastic art, and we will end the video just kind of looking through some of the cards so we can see some of the art. And this really is from that golden age of Fantasy Flight gaming art. It's old enough now that it actually does have that cool kind of vintage vibe that we crave. The encounter cards are mostly focused on combat, but many of them also have some skill challenges that add a little bit of flavor. And a lot of the cards also have a little bit of flavor text. It does take some work to connect the narrative dots, though. At its core, with rules as written, Runebound, like Talisman, is a race game. You are racing to beat that final dragon. You are racing to get to this red deck. I usually play it solo, though, because I find that the competitive games usually go on for too long. But that's because, also like Talisman, people often forget that these are race games. Competitive adventure games are kind of weird because they encourage a racing strategy to win, but this strategy often forgoes the enjoyment of the adventure. The game is long out of print. The base game can still be purchased for a pretty good price, and it has a good enough variety, but the expansions are now insanely expensive. If you want to get into the game and my house rules style sound interesting, I recommend the base game and then ordering these fan expansions from Artscow or going to BGG and printing out your own cards. I think the base game with these fan expansions, it does create for a really interesting and fun game. Then if you can find any of the other expansions for a decent price, I would recommend us maybe slowly picking up those. I do not recommend the character decks. We will be taking a look at those in another video, but I wish I would have spent my money. I wish I would have spent the money that I spent on those on a couple of the other small deck expansions. I think the character decks add the least amount of stuff, especially for solo play. I haven't quite worked out how to use those in the solo game. Okay, so let's end this video by taking a look at some of the cards in more detail so we can kind of take a look at the art and you can get a general sense of the adventuring vibe of Runebound. Oh man, look at that. This is the Heroes of Holdfast. So, sorry, I got ahead of myself. These are the ally cards. These are the cards that I have divided into my tavern deck. So these are all allies that you can hire. And you can take a certain number of allies. Usually the allies will have some kind of special ability. They will have their own health, their own fatigue, and their own combat values. So you can use the allies in combat to help you out. So we have like a Rune Apprentice here, Sir Lauren, the Heroes of Holdfast. That is great art. I love these old cards. They do have a vintage quality to them. I mean, Runebound is nearly 20 years old. I probably should have waited until 2004 to do this retrospective, so it would be a 20th anniversary retrospective. But I guess I'm doing a 19th anniversary retrospective. The Bone Herder, or the Griffin of Donsmore, the Boar of Tamalir, the Delvers of the Deep, the Orcs of Ironguard. We have the Honor Sword, the Shadow Shaper, the Oracle of the Owl, the Highway Guardian, the Cardinal Koth, or the Dragon Knight, Silver Jack, Lion of Frostgate, the Clawed Chameleon. So yeah, all kinds of cool allies that you can hire. Hiring allies in Runebound is super beneficial. You want to hire as many as you can, as quickly as you can. So this is the Blacksmith deck. This deck contains all of my normal weapons and armor. We have things like bows, this sword of the air, the Heartfinder crossbow, the winged blade, the frost axe. These decks here, they incorporate a whole bunch of the various cards from the small deck expansions that add items and allies and runes and artifacts. So we have the armor, a helmet that you can wear, a grenade, kind of a holy hand grenade, the dwarven firebomb, the bone crusher great hammer, the mirror blade axe, the forgotten flail, the razor shield, the sunplate suit of armor, the sickle of Narek Hall. So fans of Descent, of course, will recognize Narek Hall. The dragon tooth hammer, the four blades, dragon scale armor, lightning mace, the longbow of Tamalir, the quicksilver blade, the padded leather armor, the shell shield, the white blade. So all kinds of cool different weapons and armor that you can get. And then here we have our deck of artifacts. So these are enchanted weapons. You also have banners. So these banners, these kind of war banners that you can take out into battle, and they will help you with a certain ability. You have the Staff of Sparks, or the Cloak of Deception, Potion of Healing, a Cloak of the Frozen Peaks, the Fate Dice of Greyhaven, the Eyes of Alvra, the Belt of Strength, the Chalice of Tamalir, the Crown of Dawnsmore, the Staff of Light, the Cursed Scarab, all kinds of really cool artifacts. Okay, now let's kind of take a look at some of the challenge cards here in detail. Let's start with the easy ones. So there are a lot of green cards once you start adding in your expansions. And then each of the big box expansions also comes with their own decks of challenge cards, their own thematic decks of challenge cards. And those are not mixed in. They have different backs. And so you do want to keep those separate because they are very highly thematic. They are unique to that map, to that world, to that adventure that you are playing. So here we have the Rotting Hounds. Oh man, look at that guy. The Doppel Shadow, the Vengalorn. Now here is one of the events. So this would be Karina's Boon. And this would say, centuries ago, the Dragon Lord Karina sided with the armies of good to defeat Margoth. She gave her life in the battle, but legend says that her ghost may aid those who need it most. When this card is played, all heroes must test their choice of ranged melee or magic of a 16, starting with the player who drew this card and proceeding clockwise. Heroes that succeed may search the market deck and take a card of their choice with cost equal to or less than the amount by which they succeeded the test's difficulty. Interesting. Here we have a Seer-Son hybrid. So this is a really good example of a basic combat challenge. This combat challenge has 2 health, and there are their stats. There's the stats below, their range stat, melee stat, and magic stat. If you overcome this challenge, you will receive a gold, but it also has a cool little piece of flavor text. These exotic hybrids were taught mystic ways from the lands. Using their arcane third eyes, they were employed as scouts and spotters in the Dragon Wars. Some still spy for the highest bidder. So you do get some little snippets of lore in order to connect the dots in your stories, such as maybe this hill troll hill here. The ground shakes, a rumble fills the air, then turns to pounding as an enormous troll lumbers over the hill before you. Some cards will have a little bit more to do, such as maybe some various tests that you might have to take in order to engage in melee or range or magic attack. Sometimes you will have a before combat challenge, such as here you have to test a climbing skill of 11 or higher to reach the hatchling's lair. So there are some little narrative things that also happen on these basic combat challenges. Let's take a look at some of the yellow cards. So these will step up the difficulty a little bit. The difficulty does step up pretty quickly. Here we have the Crypt of the Elder Kings, the Werewolf of the Moors, the Ferox on the Prowl, the Pharaoh's Outriders, the Ferox Ambush, the Bronze Blood, the Dark Spirit of the Wood, Rising Waters Trap, a Hunting Party, the Ghoulish Mission, the Hand of Doom, a spinning log trap. I really do like the trap, the small box trap expansion. I like the traps. That's super cool. It's always fun to have traps in games. I wish more games had more traps. Here we have our blue/purple deck. It looks blue to me on the cards. It looks purple on the board, so I'm always a little confused whether it's blue or purple. Legion of the Dead, the Lightning Djinn, the Death Knight, the Sylvan Worm. We have the Sphere of Sparks. That trap's super cool. I wonder if you could take all the traps out and make a little dungeon crawl. There does need that would be super cool if there was a dungeon deck. I know I have one more fan expansion coming, and that is for a caves exploration deck that you can add to your game, just like the In the Wilds deck we talked about. Now, the only bad thing about ordering these cards from Artscow or Printer Studio is that it takes forever. So just put your order in and forget about it, because it can take up to about 3 months. They're printed in China and then they are shipped over on the slowest way possible. So it does take a really long time. Once I get that Caves expansion in, we will loop back to the base game and I'll show that Caves expansion and how that cave expansion works. So the red deck, the red challenge, the final challenge deck is the slimmest challenge, because usually by the time you've reached this point, if you're playing competitively, you've already played for like 3 hours. You're ready for the game to end. Or if you're playing solo and house rules, you only really need one of these to win the game. So in the base game, of course, you are trying to defeat the High Lord Margoth, or you are trying to defeat a number of the lesser dragons. And if you take those lesser dragons, then you need 3 of them to complete your dragon rune. And the dragon rune, if you have 3 of those, you can also win the game. So these are basically all different kinds of dragons that you have to defeat for your final challenge. So, all right, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this first video of the Runebound Retrospective. I know this video was a little scattershot. There's a lot to cover, and I know it's a little different, kind of focusing on the house rules first, but that's just the way that I play Runebound. It's the way that I have the most fun playing Runebound, is using all of the stuff, using the rules, but tweaking them and modifying them and adding things in and taking things out to kind of make this the game that I want to play. And with my house rules, with all of the things that I have a great time playing Runebound 2nd edition. And I'm really looking forward to diving into the expansions and bringing those to the table and sharing all of those awesome things with you guys. So, all right, well, we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.